News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks. Late NASCAR legend Kyle Busch's family just put out a statement saying he died of severe pneumonia, which progressed into sepsis and created complications that ultimately led to his death this week. NASCAR CEO Steve O'Donnell reflected on Busch's legacy.
To me, Kyle Busch just defines what it means to be a racer in NASCAR. Everything about it, the fire, the greatness, the heart that sometimes you rarely saw. The sport was truly lucky to have him.
Busch was a two-time Cup Series champ and won more races than anyone across NASCAR's 3 national series. He was 41. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in India now, meeting with Prime Minister Modi on trade and energy security issues. India's been hit hard by soaring oil prices and supply disruptions stemming from the war in Iran. Rubio says the U.S. is prepared to supply more energy to India to diversify imports, since India relies heavily on energy supplies shipped through the Strait of Hormuz. Meantime, several Gulf allies have joined Pakistan in trying to push for a resolution to the war, urging President Trump to allow more time for negotiations. Bloomberg News White House correspondent Kate Sullivan says Trump's touting progress, but it's unclear whether either side is actually budging.
Right now, we're just really in a holding pattern, as we have been for weeks now, frankly. And I think what's different about now is, the president said he held off on these strikes. He also said he gave sort of a loose deadline when he spoke to reporters. He said, maybe I'll give them until Friday or Saturday or Sunday or early next week. So we're sort of tracking a kind of loose early next week deadline for Iran to get back to the United States about potentially, a counter offer. But the last couple of counter offers we've seen, Trump has just completely discarded them and said they were non-starters.
Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan on Bloomberg This Weekend. President Trump's latest financial disclosure shows 3,700 trades, mostly in shares of companies across America, which has drawn scrutiny now for its astonishing scale and warnings of insider dealings. Elena Papina covers U.S. equities for Bloomberg.
Some of the biggest and busiest days were inflation days in January and in February. We looked at the day before, the day of the inflation report, and the day after. Now, this does not mean that the president had any inside information. It could have corresponded with some automatic trace, but that is interesting, and it shows that the president or his team pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the macro world and the macroeconomic data.
That's Bloomberg's Elena Papina on Bloomberg This Weekend. Experts see evidence of tax-related trading, even though the data is limited and makes it difficult to draw definitive conclusions about the president's trading activity. The U.S. has become the world's emergency oil supplier now due to the near closure of the Strait of Hormuz. But its record export surge is now peaking and inventories are shrinking rapidly. Shipments overseas are likely to fall next month, which could tighten up the global market even further and put more pressure on gas prices here at home. Gas Buddy's Patrick DeHaan.
When those run out, we could see that $5 sign by July 4. And who knows, if Americans don't slow down at $5, we could see $6 by Labor Day. All of it, though, is very much contingent on something absolutely unpredictable if and when the Strait of Hormuz opens and we start to see ships going back through it again.
AAA's got the national average at $4.52 a gallon today, down 3 cents from yesterday. Foreigners applying for permanent residency in the U.S. will now have to go back to their home countries to seek green cards. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports from Washington.
This new requirement applies to any foreigner who came to the U.S. on a temporary non-immigrant visa. This includes students, employees on H-1B or L visas, and visitors. Immigration law experts say the policy change could affect hundreds of thousands of people every year and potentially reduce legal immigration even more. It is not clear how this new policy will be implemented, and litigation over it is likely, but whether the courts push back remains to be seen. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
New York City fire officials say 2 people have now died in a shipyard explosion in Staten Island. Mayor Zoran Mamdani says it took hours to get the fire under control.
This was a complex, fast-developing emergency situation.
3 dozen others were injured last night, including a fire marshal and firefighter. SpaceX launched a successful Starship test flight last night. We get more on that from Bloomberg's Ed Kalegi.
SpaceX's upgraded Starship successfully deployed mock satellites and returned to Earth largely unscathed, though its booster spun out of control and broke apart over the Gulf of Mexico. The gigantic rocket's 12th major test flight was a successful, if slightly rough and incomplete debut of the vehicle, which is critical to Elon Musk's efforts to scale his rocket business into an artificial intelligence intelligence and satellite communications empire. Ed Kalegi, Bloomberg Radio.
And a jury says Boeing's not liable for lost revenue in a lawsuit involving its 737 MAX jets, which were grounded for 20 months after two deadly crashes in 2018 and 2019. Polish airline LOT had sued Boeing for fraud and negligence. And that's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.